Cold in the Desert by Clark Ashton Smith. Out of the fiery furnace of the desert sunset, he came to meet our caravan. He and his camel were a single silhouette of shadow-like thinness that emerged above the golden-crested dunes and disappeared by turns in their twilight-gathering hollows. When he descended the last dune and drew near, we had paused for the night, and we were pitching our black tents and lighting our little fires. The man and his dromedary were like mummies that could find no repose in the subterranes of death, and that had wandered abroad beneath the goading of a cryptic spur ever since the first division of the desert from the town. The face of the man was withered and blackened as by the torrefaction of 1,000 flames. His beard was grey as ashes, and his eyes were expiring embers. His clothing was like tatters of the ancient dead, like the spoils of ghoulish rag-pickers. His camel was a mangy, moth-eaten skeleton, such as might bear the souls of the damned on their dolorous ride to the realms of Iblis. We greeted him in the name of Allah and bade him welcome. He shared our meal of dates and coffee and dried goat flesh, and later, when we sat in a circle beneath the crowding stars, he told us his tale in a voice that had somehow taken on the loneliness, the eerie quavers, and disconsolate overtones of the desert wind as it seeks among infinitely parching horizons for the fertile, spicy valleys it has lost and cannot find. Of my birth, my youth, and the appellation by which I was known, and perhaps renowned among men, it would now be bootless to speak, for those days are one in remoteness with the reign of ar-Rāshīd. They have gone by like the Afrit builded halls of Suleiman, and in the bazaars or in the harems of my natal city none would recall me, and if one spoke my name it would be as a dying and never-repeated echo, and my own memories grow dim like the fires of hesternal wanderings on which the sands are blown by an autumn gale. But though none will remember my songs, I was once a poet, and like other poets in their prime, I sang of vernal roses and autumnal rose-leaves, of the breasts of dead queens and the mouths of living cup-bearers, of stars that seek the fabled ocean isles, and caravans that follow the eluding and illusory horizons. And because I was fevered with the strange disquietude of youth and poesy, for which there is neither name nor appeasement, I left the city of my boyhood, dreaming of other cities where wine and fame would be sweeter and the lips of women more desirable. It was a gallant and merry caravan with which I set forth in the month of the flowering of almonds. Wealthy and brave were the merchants with whom I travelled, and though they were lovers of gold and wrought ivory, of rugs and Damascus blades and olibanum, they also loved my songs and could never weary of hearing them. And though our pilgrimage was long, it was evermore beguiled with recital of odes and telling of tales, and time was somehow cheated of its days, and distance of its miles, as only the divine necromancy of song can cheat them. And the merchants told me stories of the far-off glamorous city which was our goal, and hearkening to their recountal of its splendors and delights, and pondering my own fancies, I was well content with the palmless leagues as they faded behind our dromedaries. Alas, for we were never to behold the bourne of our journey, with its orifrigiate domes that were said to ascend above the greening of paradisal trees, and its minarets of nacre beyond waters of jade. We were waylaid by the fierce tribesmen of the desert in a deep valley between hills, and though we fought valiantly, they bore us down from our hamstrung camels with their overnumbering spears, and taking our corded bales of merchandise, and deeming us all securely dead, they left us to the gyre-eagles of the sand. All but myself, indeed, had perished, and sorely wounded in the side, I lay among the dead, as one on whom there descends the pall-like shadow of Azrael. But when the robbers had departed, I somehow stanched my streaming wound with tatters of my torn raiment, and seeing that none stirred among my companions, I left them, and tottered away on the route of our journey, sorrowing that so brave a caravan should have come to a death so inglorious. And beyond the defile in which we had been overtaken with such dastardy, I found a camel who had strayed away during the conflict. Even as myself, the animal was maimed, and it limped on 3 legs and left a trail of blood, but I made it kneel and mounted it. Of the hours that ensued, I remember little. Blinded with pain and weakness, I heeded not the route that the camel followed, whether it were the track of caravans or a desert-ending path of Bedouins or jackals. But dimly I recalled how the merchants had told me at morn that there were 2 days of travelling in a desolation where the way was marked by serried bones ere we should reach the next oasis. And I knew not how I should survive so arduous a journey, wounded and without water, but I clung dizzily to the camel. The red demons of thirst assailed me, and fever came, and delirium, to people the waste with phantasmagoric shadows. And I fled through eons from the frightful immemorial things that held lordship of the desert, and would have proffered me the green beguiling cups of an awful madness with their bone-white hands. And though I fled, they dogged me always, and I heard them gibbering all around me in the air that had turned to blood-red flame. There were mirages on the waste, there were lucent mirrors and palms of fretted beryl that hovered always at an unattainable distance. I saw them in the interludes of my delirium, and one there was at length, which appeared greener and fairer than the rest, but I deemed it also an illusion. Yet it faded not, nor receded like the others, and in each interval of my phantom-clouded fever it drew nearer still. And thinking it still a mirage, I approached the palms and the water, and a great blackness fell upon me like the web of oblivion from the hands of the final weaver, and I was henceforth bereft of sight and knowledge. Waking, I deemed perforce that I had died, and was in a sequestered nook of paradise. For surely the sward on which I lay, and the waving verdure about me, were lovelier than those of earth, and the face that leaned above me was that of the youngest and most compassionate houri. But when I saw my wounded camel grazing not far away, and felt the reviving pain of my own hurt, I knew that I still lived, and that the seeming mirage had been a veritable oasis. Ah, fair and kind as any houri was she who had found me lying on the desert's verge when the riderless camel came to her hut amid the palms. Seeing that I had awakened from my swoon, she brought me water and fresh dates, and smiled like a mother as I ate and drank. And, uttering little cries of horror and pity, she bound my wound with the soothness of healing balsams. Her voice was gentle as her eyes, and her eyes were those of a dove that has dwelt always in a vale of myrrh and cassia. When I had revived a little, she told me her name, which was Nerea, and I deemed it lovelier and more melodious than the names of the sultanas, who are most renowned in song and remotest in time and fable. She said that she had lived from infancy with her parents amid the palms, and now her parents were dead, and there was none to companion her except the birds that nested and sang in the verdant frondage. How shall I tell of the life that began for me now, while the spear wound was mending? How shall I tell of the innocent grace, the childlike beauty, the maternal tenderness of Nerea? It was a life remote from all the fevers of the world, and pure from every soiler. It was infinitely sweet and secure, as if in the whole of time and space there were no others than ourselves, and naught that could ever trouble our happiness. My love for her, and hers for me, was inevitable as the flowering of the palms and their fruiting. Our hearts were drawn to each other with no shadow of doubt or reluctance, and the meeting of our mouths was simple as that of roses blown together by a summer wind. We felt no needs, no hungers, other than those which were amply satisfied by the crystal well water, by the purple fruit of the trees, and by each other. Ours were the dawns that poured through the feathering emerald of fronds, and the sunsets whose amber was flung on a blossom-purified sward, more delicate than the rugs of Bokhara. Ours was the divine monotony of contentment. Ours were the kisses and endearments, ever the same in sweetness, yet illimitably various. Ours was a slumber enchanted by cloudless stars, and caresses without denial or regret. We spoke of naught but our love, and the little things that filled our days. Yet the words we uttered were more than the weighty discourse of the learned and the wise. I sang no more, I forgot my odes and ghazals, for life itself had become a sufficing music. The annals of happiness are without event. I know not how long it was that I dwelt with Nerea, for the days were molten together in a dulcet harmony of peace and rapture. I remember not if they were few or many, since time was touched by a supernal sorcery, and was no longer time. Alas for the tiny whisper of discontent that awakens sooner or later in the bosoms of the blessed, that is heard through the central melodies of heaven. There came a day when the little oasis seemed no longer the infinite paradise I had dreamt, when the kisses of Nerea were as honey too often tasted, when her bosom was a myrrh too often breathed. The sameness of the days was no longer divine, the remoteness was no longer security, but a prison-house. Beyond the fringed horizon of the trees there hovered the opal and marble dream of the storied cities I had sought in former time, and the voices of fame, the tones of sultana-like women, besought me with far seductive murmurs. I grew sad and silent and distraught, and, seeing the change that was on me, Nerea saddened also, and watched me with eyes that had darkened like nocturnal wells in which there lingers a single star. But she uttered no breath of reproach or remonstrance. At last, with halting words, I told her of my longing to depart, and, hypocrite that I was, I spoke of urgent duties that called me and would not be denied, and I promised with many oaths to return as soon as these duties would permit. The pallor of Nerea's face and the darkening of her violet-shadowed eyes were eloquent of mortal sorrow, but she said only, "Go not, I pray thee, for if thou goest, thou shalt not find me again." I laughed at her words and kissed her, but her lips were cold as those of the dead. They were unresponsive, as if the estranging miles had already intervened. And I, too, was sorrowful when I rode away on my dromedary. Of that which followed there is much, and yet little, to tell. After many days among the veering boundaries of the sand, I came to a far city, and there I abode for a while, and found in a measure the glory and delight of which I had dreamed. But amid the loud and clamoring bazaars, and across the silken whisper of harems, there returned to me the parting words of Nerea, and her eyes besought me through the flame of golden lamps and the luster of opulent attire, and the nostalgia fell upon me for the lost oasis and the lips of abandoned love. And because of it I knew no peace, and after a time I returned to the desert. I retraced my way, with exceeding care, by the dunes and remotely scattered wells that marked the route. But when I thought to have reached the oasis, and to see again the softly waving palms above Nerea's abode, and the glimmering waters beside it, I saw no more than a stretch of featureless sand, where a lonely, futile wind was writing and erasing its aimless furrows. And I sought across the sand in every direction, till it seemed that I must overtake the very horizons as they fled. But I could not find a single palm, nor a blade of grass that was like the blossomy sward on which I had lain or wandered with Nerea. And the wells to which I came were brackish with desolation, and could never have held the crystalline sweetness of the well from which I had drunk with her. Since then, I know not how many suns have crossed the brazen hell of the desert, nor how many moons have gone down on the waters of mirage and Marah, but still I seek the oasis, and still I lament the hour of careless folly in which I forsook its perfect paradise. To no man, mayhap, is it given to attain twice the happiness and security, remote from all that can trouble or assail, which I knew with Nerea in a bygone year. And woe to him who abandons such, who becomes a voluntary exile from an irretrievable Idon. For him, henceforward, there are only the fading visions of memory, the tortures and despairs and illusions of the quested miles, the waste whereon there falls no lightest shadow of any leaf, and the wells whose taste is fire and madness. We were all silent when the stranger ceased, and no one cared to speak. But among us all there was none who had not remembered the face of her to whom he would return when the caravan had ended its wayfaring. After a while we slept, and we thought that the stranger also slumbered. But awaking before dawn, when the horned moon was low above the sands, we saw that the man and his dromedary had disappeared, and far off in the ghostly light a doubtful shadow passed from dune to dune like a fever-driven phantom, and it seemed to us that the shadow was the single silhouette of a camel and its rider.